Okay, I'll start. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity for me to present for today's titles, background issues in language learning. So this title, I actually get it from the book titled "The Practice of English Language Teaching" by Jeremy Harmer on the fourth edition book. Let us begin. We move to the first slide. So the first one is the miracle of language acquisition. Have you ever wondered how children learn language so effortlessly, unlike other skills when we learn consciously? Language seems to soak into their brains almost magically. The reason is this is because children are constantly exposed to language from adults and other children around them. They hear, they process, and they begin to understand the patterns and the rules. Interestingly, the way adults speak to children is different. We use simpler sentences, higher pitched voice, and choose words they can understand. This special kind of language helps them grasp the building of blocks. But children are not passive listeners. They have a strong desire to communicate, whether it's gargle or babble. They are constantly trying to express themselves. This natural urge fuels their language learning journey. So there is a critical windows for this effortless absorption of language. A study suggests this ability weakens after puberty. So the big question is, can class can classroom replicate this natural process? We'll delve into different language learning theories throughout this presentation to see how we can create effective learning environment that nurture this amazing ability. We move to the next slide. The second things that I'm going to explain is acquisition versus learning, unveiling the path to language mastery. Uh, Imagine moving to a new country and gradually picking up the local language through everyday interactions. That's acquisition in action. It's a subconscious process similar to how we learn our first language by being immersed in the language and naturally absorbing it. Learning, on the other hand, is a more conscious approach. We focus on grammar rules, memorize vocabulary lists, and dissect the mechanics of language. This often happens in classroom setting. So, what is the difference between these two approaches? Well, acquisition seems to be more effective for developing spoken language fluency. It allows you to express yourself naturally, just like a native speaker. However, learning plays a crucial role in developing literacy skills like reading and writing. It also helps us to analyze and monitoring our spoken language for accuracy. So, language acquired subconsciously becomes readily available for spontaneous use. Like you don't have to overthink it. Just the words just come like flowing from through your mouth and to your mind. Learned language, however, might not be as readily accessible for speaking. You might know the grammar rule, but struggle to use it in a conversation on the fly. And now, from the Krashen theory, linguist Stefan Krashen proposes a theory called comprehensible input. This refers to language that's slightly above your current level, but still understandable. It's like getting like that perfect challenge in a game. You can follow along, but it pushes you to learn more. Krashen argues that exposure to comprehensible input in a relaxed setting, similar to how parents interact with children, like it is a key for acquisition for children. Think natural conversation, not grammar drills. This roughly tuned input as opposed the finely tuned language of classroom allows for subconscious absorption. Then we move to the third slide, please. The next slide is the rise of learning methods and behaviorism impact. So we've discussed about acquisition, the natural way about how we can learn language, but remember, classrooms often take a different approach. Let's explore the rise of learning methods in language teaching. In the late 19th century, the direct method emerged. This method emphasized form, grammar, and vocabulary over than pure acquisition. Teachers sometimes use like real objects, pictures, and demonstrations to connect meaning with language structures. There is a catch though. Students don't always absorb everything they are exposed in the class. They take in some things, but not everything. This highlights the difference between input, the language here, and intake, the language they actually learn. And the another force shaping language teaching was behaviorism, a theory that based on a stimulus response reinforcement conditioning. Imagine that a rat learning to press a lever for food. So it is that is the basic example of this idea. And then we move to the other slide, please. Behaviorism in action. An experiment by Watson and Reiner in 1920 demonstrated conditioning principles. They conditioned a young boy named Albert to fear things associated with loud noise. This experiment, though ethically questionable, showed how behaviorism is work. Psychologist B.F. Skinner, in his book Verbal Behavior, applied a conditioning to language acquisition. He proposed that babies learn language by associating sounds with the words, like they are crying for something that they really need, like foods, or they need a drink, like that. And then behavior left its marks on classrooms. Teachers might emphasize correct repetition and praises student for getting it right, a form of reinforcement. This approach laid the foundation for the audiolingual method, known for its drilling exercise. Behaviorism stands in contrast to acquisition. Behaviorism focuses on learning through conditioning, while acquisition emphasizes subconscious absorption. But some of the experts have a different opinion. They have some critics that argue that behaviorism is too simplistic. However, some like Castagnero believe aspects of behavior analysis are still relevant in language learning. So there are some argument between the definition of behaviorism itself. So after that, we move to the fifth slide, please. Rethinking language learning from input to interaction. So we've I've elaborated about acquisition and learning methods, but is there any other way, another way? So now we'll delve into a shift in language learning that emphasizes interaction over rote memorization. Educational theorist Ivan Lillich challenged traditional classroom in his book titled The Schooling Society. He argued that formal education can stifle natural learning. Natural learning, he suggests, happens when we actively participate in meaningful context, not through lectures or a test. Building on this idea, Dick Albright conducted a fascinating experiment. He questioned traditional methods like grammar drills and vocabulary explanation. Instead, he focused on getting students to use English to real communication. Students completed tasks outside the classroom, like interviews and library researches, all in English. They also participated in communication games where the goal was simply to complete the task using any English that they knew. The results were promising. Everyone enjoyed the process more, and students seemed to learn more effectively. This experiment highlights a shift in focus from learning grammar rules in or the product to the actual process of communication, the doing or the activity. And then Merrill Swain's concept of comprehensible output. Uh, he echoes this idea. It's about learning by using language for communication. Even if you make mistakes, Jane Willis uh, emphasize that the importance of a supportive environment. So it is what actually every student needs. A student needs opportunity to use language freely, experiments, and express themselves without fear of correction. So they are being themselves to speak in front of a lot of people by using an English language. We move to the next slide. Focus on form versus focus on forms in language learning. So what is the difference between focus on form versus focus on forms? So focus on form happens when students actively pay attention to specific language features during tasks. This could be because the teacher points it out. The student notices it themselves while doing a task or even after completing a task. It's often incidental and driven by real world needs that arise during communication. On the other hand, focus on forms involves structuring learning around predetermined grammar points. Imagine a textbook or syllabus that teachers forms one by one. So this approach, while seemingly organized, it is considered less effective by some of language learning experts. So here's some key concept. Noticing it is a crucial for language intake, which is how we can absorb new language. Student can notice a new form through direct interaction, but also through incidental exposure in daily life or if something is particularly relevant to them. So the more something stands out or salience, the more likely they are notice it. So what's the takeaway for effective language acquisition? So some researchers suggest that it is way more best to focus on meaning-based tasks where students can naturally notice relevant language forms. So this also allow for organic learning that's not limited to a pre-selected list of grammar points in a textbook. We are heading to the next slide, the seventh slide, please. Making sense of language learning theories. So after we explore various language learning theories like behaviorism, acquisition, focus on form, and more, but is there any single best method that we can use? So the truth is there isn't. Each theory offers valuable insights. Behaviorism highlights the role of repetition, subconscious acquisition emphasize the power of comprehensible input, and focus on form acknowledge the need to study language structures. So there is no best theories on how we can use it for learning. So every theories have their own weapons to to show in or participate in how learning is used. So additionally, learners' personalities and ages influence their learning styles, of course. So what can we take away to create effective learning experience? So I'm gonna give you some of the key ingredients. The first one is exposure to comprehensible input. Learners need to be surrounded by language they can understand. And then the second, meaning focused task. Students should use language for communication in tasks that are relevant and interesting, like real life context. And then the third, opportunities to focus on language form. Attention to grammar and vocabulary can be integrated into tasks or arise from student noticing. And then the last one, repetition and rewards. Focus on practice and positive reinforcement can aid memorization after they are achieved or they get the knowledge. As a teacher, we need to give them an achievement, not only a gift or something, but we can use them word of affirmation like you are a good student, good job, keep focused, and you will get something that you want to get. So then we move to the next slide, please. Wait a minute. The power of spaced repetition in language learning. I mentioned before, repetition for learning will be thoughtful repetition aids knowledge transfer, short term or to into long term memory. The encounter repetition key is the first one is repeated exposure to language strengthens memory, and then one-time encounters are less effective. Spaced repetition matters. Repeated encounters spaced out over time are most beneficial. And then task repetition helps. First one, repeating task allows student to reuse and reformulate language. And then the second one, encourage reflection and potential language restructuring. We move to the next slide, please. So thinking about language for deeper learning. So many students learn best by actively engaging with the language they encounter. Let's move beyond rote memorization, encouraging students by to analyze sentence structure, grammar, and vocabulary choices allows them to truly understand how language is works. This learner-centered approach involves guided tasks where students discover language rules for themselves. It's like solving a puzzle. By thinking critically and problem solving, they gain a deeper understanding that goes beyond memorization. Discovery learning isn't limited to grammar. It can be applied to vocabulary, exploring word collocation, or analyzing spoken language features like casual expression. There are some things to consider. The first one is at lower levels. Complex language might be beneficial from initial simplification before diving into analysis. And then some students may prefer clear explanation. It is important to cater to different learning styles. And then we move to the 10th slide, please. Arousal, effect, and humanistic teaching. Imagine how students who are excited, curious, and engaged in their learning. This ideal state is what we strive for. Students who are motivated and interested in the material are far more likely to retain information. Apathy hinders learning, while a spark of enthusiasm ignites it. But motivation goes beyond just interest. Emotion plays a crucial role. Uh, Positive feelings like curiosity and enjoyment enhance memory and learning. Conversely, anxiety, fear, or stress can create a barrier to learning. It is way more harder for them to acquire a new knowledge. So this is where humanistic teaching comes in. It fosters a positive learning environment that prioritize student well-being and self-esteem. This is this approach encourage students' personal relevance. It is connecting learnings to student lives and interests. And then second is learner autonomy, empowering students to take their ownership of their learning journey. And then we move to the next slide. So it is importance of learner readiness in language acquisition. A student, if like imagine how human are climbing a ladder. Each rung represents a level of language proficiency. Like we want to help them climb steadily, reaching new heights in their language learning journey. So the teachability hypothesis reminds us that effective learning happens when the teachers align with the student's natural development stage. Trying to skip rungs on the ladder by teaching concepts they are not ready for can lead. So it is one of the stage that makes it harder and that can lead them feeling lost and potentially regressing. And then the zone of proximal development or ZPD. It is the sweet spot for learning. It is that the zone just above a student's current level where they can reach new heights with the right support, like a helping hand on the ladder. These concepts align with the, and then we move to the Krashen's concept of I plus one. So these concepts align with how a student can represent a current level, and the plus one is a comprehensible input that's slightly more challenging. It provides the perfect nudge to help them climb into the next rung. Scaffolding for learning. Scaffolding is the temporary support we provide to bridge the gap between a student's current knowledge and the new learning. Think of it like building temporary platforms on the ladders as they climb. As their skill develop, we gradually remove the scaffolding and allowing them to climb independently. And then to the last slide, probably. The power of language play in learning. Learning a language isn't just about memorizing grammar rules and vocabulary lists. Language is also about fun, creativity, and expressing ourselves in playful ways. Recent research highlights the importance of language play, humor, and games in language acquisition. So these activities goes beyond simply practicing communication skills. They spark a genuine interest in language. So let's explore the benefits of language play. The first one is collaboration and interaction. Playful activities often involve working together and co-constructing language, fostering communication skills in a fun environment. And then the second one is memorable learning. Jokes and games frequently utilize repetitive structures, aiding students in memorizing new vocabulary and grammar patterns. And the last one is motivation and positive effects. Laughter and a sense of enjoyment can significantly boost student motivation and create a positive learning atmosphere. So think about how we use language in real life. Humor and playfulness are a big part of every communication. By incorporating these elements into the classroom, we can create learning experiences that are not only effective, but also engaging and relevant to students' lives. We move to the next slide. So conclusion, overall, for me, like what I've said about the theories that I've elaborated, just like I said before, there is no perfect theories about how as a human we can achieve from learning a language. So just like I said, theories have their own power or ability on us as a human to acquire a new knowledge, and we don't forget about some of the components that we have to always follow up in every steps for our student or us as human to learn language. So I think that's all from me from the conclusion. If you have any question, please uh, raise your hand and please state your name. Thank you. All right, so here there is a question from Nurwanda Rizkirana. In your opinion, how can learners' first language influence their acquisition of a new language? So, a learner's first language can influence their acquisition of new language in like several ways. There are positive ways, there are negative ways. Let me elaborate the positive ways first. Uh, the first one is transfer of knowledge. If like the first language and second language have similarities in grammar, vocabulary, or pronunciation, learners can leverage their existing knowledge to accelerate the second language acquisition. For example, a Spanish speaker learning French might find similarities in verb conjugation or sentences structures, and then cognitive skills. The process of learning the first language equips learners with general language learning skills like analytical thinking or memorization strategies. So these skills can be applied to acquiring a new language. And then there are some of the negative influences. The first one, interference. Sometimes first language features can interfere with a second language acquisition. For instance, for examples, a Japanese speaker learning English might be struggling with pronouncing L sounds because Japanese doesn't have them. And then the general things that everyone can get from a negative influences is environment. So sometimes some of the people got false friends, like words that look similar between first language second language have a different meaning because of confusion. And why I say environment, because like if you don't have an environment that supports you in speaking the second language, it is way more harder for you to acquire a new language skills. And then the last one for me, language learning strategies. Learners who develop effective strategies like spaced repetition or using flashcard can overcome challenges posed by their first language. So I think that's my answer. Rwanda, is there any argument from my answers? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the answer. I think it's clear by you giving example. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is there any question? All right. I think there is no more question from the audience. Thank you very much for your attention and your time to listen and listen and look at my presentation today. I'm sorry if there is some mistake. I hope that the materials that are delivered from my presentation can be useful for you as a future teacher or a language learner in the future. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
All right, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alia Afifah, and today I would like to present my material with the title of Popular Methodology that I found in Jeremy Harmer books. All right, without further ado, let's go to the next slide. All right, this is the contents of my presentation today. The first one is about approaches, methods, procedure, and techniques. And then the second one is about popular methodology. And then the third one is bargain, post method, and context sensitivity. The fourth one is what students need and what we should offer. And the fifth one is the conclusion. All right, the next slide. All right, now let's talk about the definition of what is approach, method, procedure, and technique first, because today we will specifically we talk about methodology. That's why let's learn about the different. So what is approach? Approach is theories about the nature of language and language learning. So it guides classroom practices. It describes how language is used and learned and provides a model of language competence. The next one. The next one is a method. So method is practical realization of an approach. It includes decision about activities, teachers and students' role, and materials and syllabus organization. All right, the next one. The next one is about its procedure. Procedure is an ordered sequence of techniques. Procedures are step-by-step sequence. It's smaller than methods but larger than technique. The next one, please. And the next one is technique. Technique is the activity that applied in the classroom. It's a specific activity used in the teaching process. All right, please go to the next slide. Now we'll talk about the popular methodology. There are several here. The first one is grammar translation, direct method, and audilingualism. And the next one is PPP, an alternative to PPP. And the next one is form method. The next one is communicative language teaching, or CLT. And the next one is task-based learning, or TBL. And the last one is the lexical approach. Please go to the next slide. All right, now let's talk about grammar translation, direct method, and audiolingualism first. So why this is in one group? Because these are the earliest methods that developed in society. So let's go to the grammar translation first. Grammar translation is the practice of translating or converting the sentences of the native language into the target language or vice versa. This approach focuses on heavily on grammar explanation and accuracy. And then there are direct method. It is teaching. It is teaching method based on centrality of the spoken language. This method aims to immerse students in language from the start. And then the third one is audiolingualism. It's using the stimulus response, reinforcement model, and drills are heavily used. This method rooted in behaviorism. It relies on drills to form language habits. All right, the next slide, please. All right, let's talk about the next method. It's PPP, an alternative to PPP. So PPP is mean presentation, practice, and production. So the example of the explanation of PPP method is the practice. The teacher in the practice, the teacher shows the students the following picture and asks question about it. And for practice, the teacher gets the student to repeat the sentence. And then in the production, the students are asked to use the new language in the sentences of their own. This method is teacher-centered, and students learn in straight line, like we can see in this screen. But human learning is more random. Because of that, it sparked alternative approach that offer more flexibility and student involvement. Please go to the next slide, please. There are two alternatives for PPP method. The first one is from Kate Johnson in 1982. It's introduced by it's a deep end strategy. This strategy encourages immediate students production, flipping the usual sequence. So the teacher can then observe where the students are struggling and can return to the presentation or practices as needed after the production phase. And then the second one is by Don Ryan. It's the alternate. In Brian alternative approach, all three phases of PPP are joined, and teacher and students decided at which stage to enter the procedure. So this allows teachers and students to decide at which stage to enter the procedure, providing more flexibility in learning process. The next slide, please. All right, now this is the fourth method or communicative language learning, Suggestopedia, and total physical response and silent way. Why these methods combined together or grouped in together? Because they are developed in the 1970s and 1980s and are often considered used together. They are rarely used individually in the common classroom. So the first one is communicative language learning. It's focused on group interest learning. It's focused on supportive community-like atmosphere for language learning. For the example is students discuss topic in a circle and sharing their thoughts in the target language. And the next one is Suggestopedia. Suggestopedia is a Suggestopedia method is in Suggestopedia method, physical environment of the classroom is very important. And the example of this method is when students can listen to music while learning new vocabulary. And then the next one is total physical response. In this method, teacher can ask students to respond physically to the language they hear. The example is when teacher says stand up, the students should stand up. And then the last one is silent way. Teacher should be as silent as possible, but learners should be encouraged to speak as much as possible. The example for this method is students use colored roads to create sentence. The next slide, please. So this is communicative language teaching, or CLT. This method is rather than focusing only on grammar and vocabulary, language functions are emphasized. And the aim is to train students to use language forms. How to teach this method? Language learning will take off itself. Enough exposure to language in use and creating opportunities to the language are very important. This method is focuses on real-life communication. The example of this method is, for the example, students can do role play of ordering food in a restaurant. All right, the next slide, please. All right, now this is task-based learning, or TBL. Task-based learning, or sometimes referred to task-based instruction, or TBI, makes the performance of meaningful tasks central to the learning process. So the example for this method is planning a trip and presenting the itinerary in the target language. The next slide, please. All right, now is the last method, is the lexical approach. In language teaching, a lexical approach focuses on the importance of words and phrases, like chunks, which are learned and used together as single unit, rather than just focusing on grammar rules. So this method emphasizes in learning words and phrases in chunks. So the example of activity for lexical approach is students can learning the phrase of house on fire instead just house to make them easier to understand the meaning. And then go to the next slide, please. All right, now we move to the third topic. It's about bargains, post method, and context sensitivity. So these are the things that are important in deciding and applying method in learning process. The first one is bargain, is the negotiation process that occurs between teachers and students regarding the teaching and learning process. In language teaching, bargaining happens when we discuss and agree on learning goals, material, assessment, and classroom rules with the students. And then the next one is a post method. Post method emerged as a response to the limitation of the traditional method-based approaches. So language teaching is limited to one method. We can use multiple methods and technique simultaneously. Depends on the needs of our student. It makes the learning more flexible. And then the next one is context sensitivity. Is the awareness and responsiveness of teachers to the specific context in language teaching and learning occur. So this includes considering factors such as learner's cultural background, prior knowledge, and a learning environment. Next slide, please. All right, now in language teaching, it's important to recognize that no single method is a fits-all situation. So Kumara Fadivalu highlighted that the need to extract key components from various methods. So what do students need? and how can we provide it? So from the discussion in this book, there are six key components have emerged that we can see in this slide. The first one is affect. Students learn better when they are engaged with what is happening. This refers to the emotional aspect of learning. When students are engaged in the learning process, they are more likely to grasp information and achieve better learning outcomes. And the second one is input. Students need constant exposure to the language, otherwise they will not learn how to use it. So this exposure can come from various sources, such as reading, listening, and interacting with others in target language. And then the next one is output. Students need chances to activate their language knowledge through meaning focused tasks. This could be through activities that require them to speak or write in target language. And then the next one is cognitive effort. Students should be encouraged to think about a language as they work with it, since we are sure this is aids retention. So we should encourage students to discover how language works themselves, rather than just giving them all the information. And then the next one is grammar and lexis. So lexis is important as grammar. Students need to learn how to use both effectively in communication. And then the last one is how, why, and where. It's the actual way we do things depends not on the choice of the method, but rather on why and where we are teaching. So, all right. The next slide, please. All right. That's all. My material for presentation today. The conclusion of my material today is while there are numerous methodology available for language teaching, applying teaching methodologies thoughtfully is crucial. Contextual assessment and adaptability are the key for optimal learning outcomes. So next slide, please. All right, thanks so much for listening my presentation today. Anyone have a question? If you have any question, please raise your hand or write it in the comment section. Thank you. All right, because there is no question, I will close my presentation today. Thank you so much everyone for listening and participating in my presentation. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.